My parents kept a scrapbook for every year of my brother's life. 42 volumes, displayed on shelves in their living room. I found mine in a single box in the garage, water damaged, half the photos ruined. Nobody had ever moved it. Tonight, every single story is about a parent who had a favorite child. Let me take you back to where each of these stories started. Story 1 begins, my name is Vanessa. I am 37 years old. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and 9 months ago, while helping my parents prepare for a home renovation project, I discovered the specific physical contrast between how my childhood memories had been preserved compared to my brother's, finding his life documented across 42 carefully maintained scrapbook volumes displayed prominently on custom shelving in our parents' living room, while my own childhood photographs and mementos existed only within a single cardboard box stored in their garage, a box that had apparently never been properly protected from moisture and had suffered significant water damage that destroyed or severely degraded a substantial portion of its contents. My brother's name is Christopher, and I want to describe the specific moment this contrast became fully apparent to me. Helping my mother sort through garage storage as part of preparing for contractors, finding this single damaged box labeled with my own name, opening it to discover water stains and mold damage that had clearly compromised many of the photographs and papers inside, understanding, as I processed this discovery, that this represented the complete extent of how my own childhood had been physically documented and preserved, that I want to describe what I did once I understood the full scope of this contrast, asking my mother directly why my own materials had been stored so differently from Christopher's carefully maintained scrapbook collection. Watching her expression shift into visible discomfort as she attempted to explain this disparity, initially suggesting that perhaps my own box had simply been misplaced or forgotten during some household reorganization. An explanation that felt insufficient once I pointed out that this would have required consistently forgetting about my materials across multiple different reorganization projects over many years, while somehow always remembering to properly maintain and display Christopher's equivalent collection throughout this same extended period. I want to describe the more complete explanation I eventually extracted through continued, direct questioning, learning that my mother had indeed made a conscious decision years earlier to invest considerably more time and effort into documenting Christopher's childhood specifically, an explanation she offered with genuine visible distress once she finally articulated it directly, suggesting that she had felt Christopher's achievements and milestones seemed more worth celebrating and preserving compared to my own, without ever fully examining or questioning this assumption throughout the actual years she was making these ongoing documentation choices. Update 4 months later. My mother has expressed profound, genuine distress upon fully confronting this pattern, working extensively with her own therapist to understand why she made these unconscious choices throughout our childhood, acknowledging that this disparity reflects something significant about how differently she experienced and valued each of her children that she had never previously examined so directly. I have spent considerable time attempting to salvage what remained of my own damaged photographs and materials, working with a photo restoration specialist to recover whatever images could still be preserved from the water damage. A process that has been both practically challenging and emotionally significant, given what this restoration effort represents. About finally, belatedly, treating my own childhood documentation with the care it should have received originally. Christopher, once I shared this discovery with him, expressed genuine discomfort with learning about this specific disparity, offering to help fund the restoration process and expressing his own commitment to ensuring any future family documentation, including for his own children, would be handled with genuine equality rather than repeating whatever unconscious pattern had produced this significant difference in how our parents preserved each of our childhoods. Vanessa's childhood sat, damaged in a single box, while her brothers filled 42 carefully maintained volumes. Our second story tonight is about a discovery that also involved physical preservation, but this time it was not about photographs. It was about a room kept exactly the same, for reasons nobody had ever explained. Wait, this is the part that gets me most. Here is what she found. My name is Michelle. I am 33 years old. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and 8 months ago, returning to my parents' home for an extended visit following the birth of my first child, I noticed that my childhood bedroom had been converted into a home office almost immediately after my wedding 6 years earlier, while my sister's equivalent bedroom, despite her own departure for her own marriage occurring around the same general time frame, remained essentially preserved exactly as she had left it, a disparity I had somehow never fully registered during previous, shorter visits home. My sister's name is Jennifer, and I want to describe the specific process of noticing this pattern more consciously during this particular extended visit, spending considerably more time in my parents' home than I typically did during brief holiday visits, having the opportunity to actually walk through and observe various rooms more carefully than my usual quick trips allowed. I want to describe what I actually found once I paid this closer attention, discovering that my own former bedroom now functioned entirely as my father's home office, containing no remaining trace of my own childhood occupancy, while Jennifer's room, just down the hallway, remained essentially frozen in the specific configuration she had left it in, her furniture, some remaining personal items, and general bedroom arrangement still intact despite her own departure for marriage having occurred within roughly the same general time frame as my own. I want to describe the conversation I eventually had with my mother about this specific disparity, asking her directly why my own room had been converted so quickly following my wedding while Jennifer's remained preserved for what I calculated was now approaching 7 years since her own departure. Watching my mother offer various explanations centered on practical need for office space that had simply arisen at the specific time of my own departure, an explanation that felt increasingly difficult to accept as complete once I considered that Jennifer's departure had occurred only slightly earlier than my own, meaning any genuine, escalating need for office space should have logically applied similarly to both of our departures rather than specifically targeting my own room for immediate conversion while somehow never extending to Jennifer's equivalent space. Update 4 months later. My parents have continued struggling to provide a fully satisfying explanation for this specific timing disparity, my father eventually acknowledging, with visible discomfort, that he genuinely did not have a clear, conscious memory of specifically choosing to convert my room while preserving Jennifer's, suggesting this may have reflected some unconscious pattern he had simply never previously examined or questioned throughout the years this disparity had existed. I have processed considerable complicated emotion about this discovery, understanding that even physical spaces within my childhood home had apparently been allocated based on some unspoken hierarchy regarding whose continued connection to the family home mattered more, a realization that has added new context to various other patterns throughout my childhood that I had previously attributed to simple coincidence or circumstance rather than recognizing as part of a broader, consistent favoritism I had never fully examined until this specific, concrete comparison became impossible to overlook. Michelle's room disappeared, while her sister's remained frozen in time. Our third story tonight is about a discovery that required no walking through physical rooms at all, because it happened through a single, devastating phone call during an actual emergency. This is the part that stays with me. Here is what happened. My name is Sarah. I am 40 years old. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and 7 months ago, During a serious medical emergency involving my own father's sudden hospitalization, I discovered, through reviewing the actual call log on my mother's phone during a stressful moment when she asked me to help locate a specific number, that she had called my brother 3 times before making any attempt whatsoever to contact me, despite my own significantly closer physical proximity to the hospital compared to my brother's considerably longer travel distance from a different state. My brother's name is Michael, and I want to describe the specific circumstances of this discovery. Sitting with my mother in the hospital waiting room during what remained an acute, frightening emergency, offering to help her manage various phone calls and logistics given her own overwhelming stress, glancing at her phone's call history to locate a specific contact she needed, noticing in that moment this clear pattern of 3 consecutive calls to Michael occurring before any attempt to reach me, despite my living only 15 minutes from the hospital compared to Michael's several-hour travel distance. I want to describe what this discovery meant in practical terms during an actual emergency situation, understanding that had my father's condition been even more acute, requiring immediate family decision-making or presence, my mother's apparent instinct to contact Michael first, despite my own considerably closer availability, could have created genuine, significant complications given how much longer it would have taken him to actually arrive compared to my own immediate availability. I want to describe the conversation I eventually had with my mother about this pattern, once the acute emergency had stabilized enough to allow for this more difficult discussion, asking her directly why she had called Michael first despite my own closer proximity and immediate availability. Watching her response reveal genuine surprise at having this pattern pointed out so directly, initially suggesting she simply was not consciously aware of the specific order she had called family members, an explanation that, while perhaps reflecting genuine lack of conscious awareness in that specific stressful moment, still raised broader questions about what unconscious priority pattern had produced this particular sequence during genuine crisis. Update. 4 months later. My father has recovered well from his medical emergency, and my mother has expressed genuine distress upon reflecting more deeply on why Michael's contact apparently represented her first instinct during crisis despite my own significantly greater practical availability, acknowledging through subsequent conversation that she may have unconsciously developed a pattern throughout our adult lives of viewing Michael as somehow more central to significant family decisions and communications, despite my own consistent ongoing presence and support throughout various other family circumstances over the years. We have had several extended conversations since this incident specifically addressing emergency contact protocols going forward, establishing clearer, more explicit expectations about contact order during any future medical emergencies that account for actual practical factors like proximity and availability, rather than whatever unconscious priority pattern previously influenced my mother's specific actions during this particular crisis. Sarah discovered a pattern that could have had real consequences during an actual emergency. Our 4th story tonight is about a discovery that also involved priority and timing, but this time it happened across an entire career, not a single phone call. Wait, let that sink in. Here is what happened. My name is Nicole. I am 36 years old. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and 6 months ago, during a conversation with a close friend about upcoming family visits, I found myself actually calculating and comparing my parents' attendance pattern at professional and career-related events for my sister versus myself throughout our respective adult careers, discovering once I completed this comparison that they had attended literally every single one of my sister's public speaking engagements and work presentations across her decade-long career, while never once attending any equivalent professional achievement or presentation of my own throughout my own similarly lengthy career. My sister's name is Catherine, and I want to describe the specific process of this realization, discussing general family visit planning with my friend, mentioning that my parents would be attending Catherine's upcoming industry conference presentation, a comment that led my friend to ask, with genuine curiosity, whether they had attended similar events for my own career, a question that prompted me to actually think through and calculate this comparison directly for what felt like the first time. I want to describe what this calculation actually revealed once I worked through it carefully, confirming that yes, my parents had indeed attended every single one of Catherine's public professional presentations throughout her decade-long career, a pattern I could specifically document through family photos and social media posts spanning this entire period. While I could not identify a single instance of either parent attending any equivalent professional event of my own, despite my own career including numerous public presentations and professional achievements throughout this same general time frame, I want to describe the conversation I eventually had with my parents about this specific pattern, presenting them with this calculated comparison, watching my mother's initial reaction move through genuine surprise at seeing this disparity quantified so directly, followed by attempts to explain it through various circumstantial factors, suggesting perhaps scheduling conflicts or geographic distance, had simply made attending my own events less practical, explanations that became difficult to sustain once I pointed out that my own professional events had occurred in locations and at times reasonably comparable to Catherine's, meaning any genuine, consistent practical barrier should have applied similarly to both of our respective careers rather than producing this stark, complete disparity in actual attendance. Update. For months later, my parents have struggled considerably with fully processing this discovery, my father eventually offering what felt like a more honest, if painful, acknowledgement that they likely held some unconscious assumption throughout our adult careers that Catherine's professional field simply felt more inherently interesting or worth celebrating compared to my own, an admission that, while difficult to hear, at least provided some concrete acknowledgement of the actual pattern rather than continued attempts to explain it away through circumstantial factors that had never fully held up under direct comparison. My parents attended my most recent professional presentation, the first time either of them had ever been present for any equivalent career event of my own, a moment that felt simultaneously meaningful and painfully overdue given that it arrived only after this direct, difficult confrontation about a decade-long pattern I had never previously fully recognized or addressed throughout my entire professional career to that point. A decade of presentations. Zero attendance. Nicole finally calculated what she had never consciously counted. Our final story tonight, Story 5, is about a discovery that took the longest of any story tonight because it required comparing not one pattern, but an entire lifetime of small moments finally added together. This is the last story. Here is what happened. My name is Rebecca. I am 34 years old. I live in Sacramento, California, and 5 months ago, prompted by a persistent, difficult-to-articulate feeling that had been building over recent years, I made the somewhat unusual decision to actually export and analyze our extended family's group text conversation history spanning approximately 10 years, systematically counting mentions and discussions of myself compared to my brother throughout this entire documented communication history, discovering, once I completed this comprehensive analysis, that my brother had been mentioned, discussed, or centered in family conversation approximately 3 times more frequently than I had throughout this full decade of documented family communication. My brother's name is Thomas, and I want to describe the specific process of conducting this analysis, exporting our family group chat's complete message history, a text thread that had remained continuously active across this entire 10-year period, involving our parents, Thomas, myself, and several other extended family members, systematically reading through and categorizing messages based on whether they primarily discussed, celebrated, or focused on either Thomas's or my own life updates, achievements, and general activities. I want to describe what this systematic count actually revealed once I completed this admittedly time-consuming but ultimately clarifying analysis, finding that across this decade of family communication, Thomas's various life updates, achievements, and general activities had generated significantly more family discussion and engagement compared to equivalent updates I had shared about my own life throughout this same period. A pattern that held remarkably consistent across multiple different life categories, including career updates, relationship milestones, and general daily life sharing, that we had both consistently contributed to this shared family communication space. I want to describe what it felt like to have this kind of systematic, quantified confirmation of a pattern I had always sensed on some intuitive level but had never previously had the concrete documentation to fully understand or address, finding actual countable evidence that my own life updates within this shared family space had consistently received less engagement, discussion, and celebration compared to equivalent updates from Thomas throughout this extended, documented period. Update 4 months later. I shared this analysis with my parents, a conversation that proved genuinely difficult as they processed seeing this pattern documented in representing my own potentially subjective perception of family dynamics. My mother in particular expressed significant distress upon reviewing the actual compiled data, acknowledging that seeing this pattern laid out so clearly across an entire decade made it impossible to dismiss or explain away as simply my own misperception, representing instead genuine, documented evidence of how differently our family had actually engaged with and celebrated each of our respective lives throughout this extended period. I have noticed, in the months since this conversation, what feels like genuine conscious effort from my parents specifically to engage more substantively with my own life updates within our ongoing family communication, though I continue processing what it means to have needed this kind of extensive, systematic documentation effort, simply to have a pattern acknowledged that I had been quietly experiencing and absorbing throughout an entire decade of family interaction. That's all 5 stories tonight. If any of these hit close to home, let me know in the comments below. If you want more stories like this, every single day, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. A like helps YouTube show this to more people who might need to hear. Tonight, tomorrow's video has a story that might be the most shocking one yet, so make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for watching.